Just a reminder to start here. First of all, just to relax you a little bit, these next 4 pictures are actually of our house. We live in the woods. Remember I told you I was going to be an architect if I wasn't going to be a preacher. So this is out the back deck. This is out the front sidewalk. This is the front yard. I built the picket fence and some arches and stuff. And we decorated the house for Christmas, so it looks very nice. I wanted to just warm you up for this one. Okay, just thought you needed to see that. I'm going to quickly review what I call the 4s, because I know we kind of ran through it last week. So this is going to be very quick because you've submitted quite a few questions, and I want to try to get to as many of those as possible. There are 4 purposes in life, and if you don't keep your purposes in life straight, you're going to find yourself to want to end your own life. You're going to find yourself wanting to end the life of somebody else because we tend to ascribe to worldly purposes. Your 4 purposes in life are come to faith, grow in faith, share the faith, and then live the faith. And those are the purposes in life. I gave that to you last week, so you should still have that. So I'm going to jump ahead then to the 4 reasons that people are afraid to die. They don't know where they're going. They worry about the accounting before God, what to say before God. They're afraid of the path that leads to death, and they're concerned for the survivors, or those they leave behind. I had said last week that I was going to comment on that a little bit. I find this to be the most common reason that people within our own circles are afraid to die. They'll say, okay, I know I'm going to heaven. Granted, the dying process isn't going to be pleasant, but it's short compared to eternity. Accounting, I'm going to stand behind Jesus. Jesus will be my ticket into heaven. But I do worry about who's going to take care of those I leave behind. And I hear it enough that, quite honestly, we as congregations and as a family of believers need to wake up to it. When our pastor had died at the church we were attending in Slinger, I was alarmed over the fact that there was concern, people weren't getting visited, all that kind of stuff. And so what I did is I started a care committee. I went to the most caring person I know, which is my mother. My mom and dad live next door. And my mother, it was kind of funny because there was a group of widows in the church that would get together for coffee every once in a while. And they invited my mother along all the time. And I asked my dad if that bothered him. They seemed to be kind of sizing him up to be leaving. But I said to Mom, I said, why don't you start recruiting them and see if we can start this care committee? So the goal of the care committee, among the goals they have, is to provide enough assurance to people so that they know that even when you go, we're going to be here. The story I was going to tell, I was buying time until I remember the story I was going to tell. When I was in Plymouth, I was assigned to Plymouth, Good Shepherd in Plymouth. I used to take the 5 girls with me grocery shopping. I love doing things with all 5 girls, and at that time they were running like ages 2 to 8. And so I would go at 7 in the morning. We were just commenting, I'm an early person, and all of my daughters are early people. So we would go to Piggly Wiggly in Plymouth, and you get through all the shopping experiences, and the girls like going along because they usually found Dad to be a soft touch. They can get the food, the things they want. And so I'd be at checkout, and this lady goes, "Are these all yours?" Now, what a silly thing to say. It's 7 o'clock in the morning. They somewhat look alike. And so yes, they are mine. And then she proceeds to say, I don't know how you can do it. I've got two, I can't even, they're driving me crazy. Throughout this whole venting that she's doing, she really is also telling you that if you're killed on the way home, don't ask me to help take care of those kids. And oftentimes we communicate that inadvertently. And so part of a care mentality is to always try to demonstrate to people that I will be there. I will be there. I made that commitment to my best friend when he was dying in April. And so I still keep in touch with his daughters down at University of Alabama. The son lives in the area. The wife, the widow, is in the area. I keep track with her. And now I seem to be going through this with a second cycle with, of all people, the waitress that waits on us every Tuesday morning when I have breakfast at Alma's up in Allenton. Her husband's got a terminal cancer at 61. And so I went up with them to go through the clinical trials, examination, and so forth. And you just want to always relay to people that, we'll take care of that. God says, I'm going to work it all out for good, but you sometimes need that assurance that you could be there. Okay, the 4 I did not cover is the 4 truths about suffering. And if you look at the numbering on these slides, this is the last slide. That says 171. So I had a long section for this, so you're just getting the four truths about it. Suffering is a consequence of sin. No matter how much you work to alleviate suffering, I don't care how hard you work at it, you will always find yourself be lacking. And you got to accept this. Now, when I attend pain management courses, there's a common mantra that they say between 90 and 95% of all pain can be managed. But invariably, you feel that you're in that 5 or 10% area. And the first rule is you have to be willing to get rid of the people doing the pain management and replace them with someone else. You have to. I have this conversation with countless couples who will complain, that they're just in horrible pain and everything. I said, well, tell me about the doctor. Well, it's the family doctor, the one we've had for the last 35, 40 years. I said, well, then time to get a new one. I mean, and usually, I usually recommend you get a foreign doctor, a young foreign doctor. And I do that. It has nothing to do with prejudice, but it does have a lot to do with a bias. Over the years, I've worked with a lot of foreign medical professionals. They're far better students, it seems. They seem to really work hard in studying, and they seem to understand pain management in ways that are incredible. And I remember with your mom, and when she was dying of pancreatic cancer, we got a call. They were living up at the Gardens in Hartford. We got a call that we had to take her to the hospital. She was miserable, and she was. We went and picked her up. She was horrible. We got her into the hospital, and we wanted a foreign doctor. And we got a foreign doctor. 2 hours later, she was cracking jokes. I mean, they just know how. So just remember that. But you can't alleviate everything. And you and I are living examples. God said one day, I'm going to make it possible for you to have a vehicle that will generate heat and air conditioning inside of it. We're going to create the technology that the tires will be able to give you traction in snow. We're going to be able to transport you from one place to another place with very little interaction with the elements, and we still whine about it, because it's never going to be good enough. Secondly, suffering makes you conscious of God. And people oftentimes, when they face suffering, start talking to God. They just, you lead a life, you kind of drifted away. What's interesting about suffering and hardship is it makes you feel incredibly helpless. You felt so empowered, so strong, and then all of a sudden you're reminded how helpless you are. Thirdly, it allows you to glorify God. Was this man born blind because of his sin or his parents' sin? The disciples asked. Jesus said, no, this is to glorify God. Sometimes suffering involves God doing something incredible to make everyone pause and think about it. And you encounter that on occasion. You get those miraculous recoveries. They shouldn't have made it. I mean, even, I mean, have you ever found yourself when you're in a hurry? That's when the train comes by. When you're in a hurry, that's when you forgot your phone in the house. You got to run back in. When you're in a hurry, and our big thing is that we're always saying God is slowing us down because He's working on timing, and so forth. But it kind of keeps you a little bit mindful that you should be conscious of God. We have a friend of ours for glorifying God who was diagnosed with breast cancer for the second time. And of course, everyone's dancing around it. Nobody wants to kind of call it out or anything. Her response was, now I get to talk to people about Jesus again. She says, because people tend to listen to you if they think you're on your way out, and they just do. And so she said, I get to talk about Jesus. Finally, it's an outlet for the faith of others. And this is a hard one to swallow. But when the man was beaten and left for dead in the side of the road, and we're told about the two people who knew better walked by, and the man who went down and helped him, so we all know, I mean, you can kind of draw your natural conclusions. The two people should have stopped by. They were the religious leaders. It was a Samaritan with his corrupted religion. He knew enough that this was his neighbor and so forth. Nobody ever asks about the guy lying in the ditch. I mean, what did he get out of this? We're not told that it gave him an opportunity to glorify God. We're not told that it made him conscious of God. Sometimes you're just the outlet for the faith of others. Now, you remember early on when I talked about facing death, there's two ways to look at it. There's the way you and I deal with the death of other people, and then there is the way we face the prospect of our own death. And I find that we don't always die well. I have sat at the bedside of people who have used the prospect of dying as a chance to settle a few scores. Well, should we tell your brother? Don't even tell him. He never cared about me when I was doing well. Don't call him over. I mean, we act this way. It's the silliest thing because it forgets everything about what you're supposed to be doing in life. But the point is that it's going to make you an outlet for the faith of others. And the most real example I can give you, and I don't have time to show you the video clip, but Pat Robertson caused a real skirmish when on his 700 Club, somebody had sent in a question and said, my wife's got dementia, or Alzheimer's, they called out. My wife's got Alzheimer's. I was wondering, do I still have to stay married to her? Can I divorce her and move on? And he said, no, you don't need to stay married to her. And it made national news, all that kind of stuff. Think of it a little bit differently. When the pastor sits down with you in pre-marriage counseling, and he goes through Ephesians 5, he talks about loving, till death do us part, that kind of thing. The word that he's using, the word that he's referencing out of Ephesians 5, in the Greek is the word agape. It's not the word phileo. Phileo means you're my friend, you're my buddy. But agape requires a sacrificial, it really requires more commitment. Now, those of us who've been married for a while, except us, ours has been just glowing, our relationship. But those of us who've been married for a while, you might know that not every day is a honeymoon. There are ups and downs, ups and downs. And so some days it's very strong, affectionate love that holds you together. Sometimes it's just commitment. Some days you're just committed. So now one of you is diagnosed with advanced dementia. Okay, so you're no longer giving all the rewards that you give when you're in love with somebody. There's no hand squeezing, kiss on the cheek, none of that stuff. And so then it's commitment. I come every day, I come and take care of you. I am committed to you. And so you become an outlet for the faith of others. So now when you've got somebody who is diagnosed with advanced dementia, people say, well, why don't you just let me die? Why don't you just let them pull the plug? I'm not doing anything anymore. But don't be so selfish. Maybe it's not all about you. Maybe it's all about everybody else. I always tell the story of the granddaughter who talked to me about visiting her grandmother, who was diagnosed with advanced dementia. She was at that stage. She was completely unresponsive. She had a busy life. She was dropping the kids off at school on her way to work, swing by, visit grandma, and she was doing this every day. And she was starting to burn out. And so she'd come and she had said, I just don't think I can keep doing this. What should I do? And I said, I want you to keep going every day, and I want you to decorate the room for her birthday, for the holidays. I want you to sing her favorite hymns, her favorite songs, hold her hand, read meditations, read the Bible to her. And I said, if you do this, I can guarantee you, if you do it long enough, someone's going to ask you, how do you do it? I said, because maybe it has nothing to do with her. Maybe it even has nothing to do with you. Maybe it's all about the janitor. It's about somebody, because in a world where the love of most is growing cold, what Jesus said, he said, all of a sudden they're going to find uncommon love, and they're going to wonder how you keep doing it or why you keep doing it. And they're going to say it in a very, very interesting way. They're just going to commend you, or they're going to, just talk with, it's like the lady asking how I can handle the 5 kids, That's kind of how those conversations start. And when Peter wrote in his first letter, in your heart revere Christ as Lord, always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks you the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. This is how 21st century Western culture people ask you about the hope that you have. When you display uncommon sacrifice, uncommon love. And it just gives you, why? Because don't we have trouble, talking religion? We just do. Given the choice, if you had a coworker that needed to learn about Jesus, you would like to find some magical way where you can corral them and you can corral the pastor and you can put those two together. But the reality is, unless you got Pastor Lyra, but other than him, the reality for the rest of us is that you're more effective at it than the pastor is, because you're meeting them on their plane, on their common ground. Okay, so those are the 4s, and now I'm going to get into the Q&A. So these are the questions you submitted. Too hard. We won't answer that one. No, never mind. I'm joking. Do people still take issue with using medication to treat mental illness, depression, anxiety, BPD, etc.? I don't know if people take issue with it. I don't encounter it anymore. I encountered it early on. Early on in my ministry, there was like a stigma around it. In fact, we're going to be doing a podcast. We're going to be recording it this week, but I think it won't be played until early 2023. But we're sitting down with somebody from the seminary who's teaching pastors about counseling. And one of the questions that I point out to him is, back when Pastor Lyra and I were in the SEM, we used to use Shepherd Under Christ. Remember that? We used to call it Shepherd Underwater, because it usually, by the time you get on reading it, you realize you're never going to get everything done. But there was a section in there devoted to counseling. And even by the time the book was published in 1974, I had the class in like 1981, something like that, 82. A lot had already changed. And nowadays, if you call CLR and you've got a crisis going on and it involves more than God's input on an issue, we can tap you and direct you right over to Christian Family Solutions, for professional counseling. And so I don't think it carries the stigma. If you're on medication, the best thing I can tell you is, doggone it, stay on it. The number one problem I have at New Beginnings, our home for mothers, is it's not uncommon. A lot of those mothers come with a boatload of issues. They've been sexually abused, violently abused, and so forth. A lot of them suffer from bipolar. We run into trouble with them, I would say 70% of the time. It's rooted in the fact that they were on medication and they stopped for whatever reason. And I'm fully aware of the fact that it sometimes makes you constipated, gives you diarrhea, disrupts the menstrual cycle, all those kinds of things. But I'll tell you, when you go off that medication, mentally you become something that is difficult, if not impossible, to manage. So stay in touch with your doctor. But No, the short answer is I don't see the stigma in it. Okay. Is there any support for suicide survivors, those who survive a suicide attempt? I don't know. I do know that Pastor, who's about suicide attempt, Mequon, we had him, Kurt Ebert. Pastor Kurt Ebert's son had committed suicide, and he started a support group, and he's the pastor at Christ Alone, whatever they're calling it, Christ Alone in Thiensville. And we had him on the podcast. I will tell you that it was our number one listened to podcast, was having that on. So people's lives have been affected by it. But I do not, personally, I think that if you survived a suicide attempt, I think you should be engaged with a professional counselor. Pastor Ebert does it primarily with support group. It's really support group work. So, okay, I always got to read this, see if you're setting me up for anything. What is the parental role and purpose in their children's lives as the children approach and surpass the age of legal consent? If there are concerns that fall into the category of lifestyle issues, how do parents respond financially and socially? Okay, welcome to the nightmare of all of us who have adult children. Your responsibility, let's first of all talk about obstacles. The number one obstacle I have is what I always refer to as the parenting complex. And the parenting complex works like this. A number of years ago, when my parents were celebrating their anniversary, their wedding anniversary is on January 24th. And I was in California at the time I was preaching. It was a Sunday, and my parents at that time were living in, they were living in Nashotah, I think. And, but I remember calling them and saying, we will take you out for dinner when we come back, And so remember the old Bombay Bicycle Club? Remember that? And, okay, that's where we went. And if you get my mother and I in public laughing, you'll probably find us at the county jail. I mean, we get real ruckus. We just had a wonderful time. We get to the end of the meal, and my dad does the dad thing. He starts reaching for his back pocket to pull out his wallet. And I'm going, Dad, I said, we're gonna do this. And he does this. He goes, oh, Robert, he goes, you've got the girls, you've got the kids and everything. Okay, now think about this for a moment. I said, I was assigned, I'd served for 5 years, pastor of a mission congregation. I said, then I've been head of an international organization ever since. The girls were already getting into adulthood and everything. And by all definitions, I would say you're pretty much out on your own. But the reality is your mom and dad still see you as the little boy whose nose they wiped and bottom they wiped. And that's always going to be the problem. That's going to be the problem you have as your children get older. And this is where you need someone who's wonderful, who's always reminding me, Bob, that is your dream for them, that is not their dream. And that's kind of her mantra to me, because you always want to try to do it. Now, that being said, this is practical advice on a practical level. We try to communicate to our kids that we're going to be there to help you. I'm not going to be there to rescue you if you do wrong. In fact, I want you to suffer the consequences. But they're going to make stupid mistakes the same way I made stupid mistakes. So I will try to help you. But I don't know about you, but a lot of times they're not interested in your advice. They're definitely not interested in your advice. They're interested in your help once in a while, but not your advice. And one of the problems that I found is that oftentimes when we're asked to help our kids out with money, we presume to have even more authority over how they use it. And so we'll do something like this. Okay, well, if you need $5,000, I'll give you $5,000. But doggone it, you better quit smoking. Do you know how much money you spend on those cigarettes? And then, we'll go down the line. Or you got to give up the video games. What? You mean you've got a Netflix account? The point is that learn to differentiate your desire to help and your desire to manage. And there's a big difference. And, they always say that you could, accomplish more with, I don't know how the saying goes, with honey rather than whatever it is. But you know what I'm trying to say. Even with your own children, you're only going to have effectiveness if you build a bridge and not a wall. So you could pound on the table if they make lifestyle choices you don't agree with. You could demand that they never step foot in your house and you're not going to, whatever it is. Unless you find a way to communicate God's word through that kind of environment, don't do it. You try to always build a bridge. Now, that's a great generic answer. I know some of you are wrestling through, my daughters come out gay or lesbian. My son is into drugs and he's used up the family fortune. I've dealt with families whose son have molested the daughters and is in jail. How do you get through all that? Those are all difficulties. But one thing is that I'm finding, and I'm 66, and I'm still just learning it, but that when the children grow up and move out, they've grown up and moved out. And sometimes I got to step back and not want to run their lives, but quite honestly, I want to help them the same as I want to help the waitress down at the restaurant. And you got to have that kind of attitude. Can a baby who is aborted or stillborn go to heaven? I certainly hope so. We lost our first one through stillbirth. But I always try to caution. We had, was it this week or last week? We had the head of Respect Life, the Archdiocese. Last week. Okay, we had the head of the Respect Life program for the Archdiocese of Milwaukee over for lunch. And I growled a little bit to him that they have a program called Project Rachel. And in Project Rachel, the whole idea of some of the material they created for Project Rachel is you've had an abortion, now you're suffering from what we call post-abortion syndrome. You're feeling the loss. And so it says, we want you to imagine the child in Jesus' arms and everything. I don't have a problem per se with that kind of thinking, but never relay information that isn't in Scripture. And see, Scripture doesn't say what happened to our stillborn child. Scripture doesn't say what happens to the aborted child. What Scripture says is that sometimes in life you encounter a crossroads where you are helpless to know the answer, and you can only do one thing, and that you have to simply say that the perfect God will do what is perfectly right in that most imperfect situation. And sometimes you got to step back. I feel like I was just having the conversation yesterday or the day before with someone about dealing with the helplessness that you feel when you've gotten the diagnosis and they're telling you that it's only a matter of time. And I said most of us walk through life with pretty minimal, if negligible, challenges to our faith. You go through life, you might get a little diagnosis, something like that, but you kind of get through it. But, there's something about when you are diagnosed with a terminal condition, there's nothing they can do. It's congestive heart failure. You've got to, prepare. It's only going to be a matter of, a few weeks or a few months. And then you find out actually where your faith is. And that's where you go through those reasons people are afraid to die and so forth. So my candid answer is that we don't know where the souls of stillborn babies and aborted children are. Do I want to believe they are in heaven? I want to believe they're in heaven more so than people want to believe that Old Yeller is in heaven. Then people get all worried about where their pets will be and that kind of stuff. I want to believe that, but more than that, you simply trust God will do what is perfectly right and just. Okay, someone wrote a letter. Let me get back to this one. That's a long one. I work with a lot of people after severe traumatic injuries, car accidents, gunshot wounds, etc., and their families are going through medical decisions and end-of-life care discussions. How can a Christian approach a situation like this responsibly? As the family member, as a medical professional, giving advice, and as a person preparing to be in the hospital, as a person preparing to be in the hospital bed, preparing the person to be, this is one of those double entendre sentences. As a person preparing to be in the hospital bed on life support one day. Okay, I think I know what you mean by that. Remember what you bring to the table. And you may be a medical professional, which means you bring your medical skill. You may be a warm, loving personality, which means you bring that to the table. But don't forget who you are first. You are a lost and condemned creature, purchased and won by the blood of Christ. When you approach these encounters that way, you know, when I sat down with this couple, and you know, I knew him only a little. You know, he had come into the restaurant, but I knew his wife. I got to know her. She's been our waitress for a couple of years. And I sat down with him and found out kind of his full story. He had a 16-year-old son that he was very close with. And he was killed in a head-on collision. And at first they thought that he was talking on a cell phone because when they found him in the car, he was like this. And but he didn't have a cell phone. And there was no cell phone. And they suspect that it may have been some sort of medical crisis that occurred because the semi that was coming towards him said, all of a sudden the car just drifted right off and was not slowing down or anything, and did it. But he immediately, you know, why would God do this? And then he talked about meeting Timothy Dolan, who is now the cardinal out east, and their Catholic background, and how crushed he was because, you know, Timothy Dolan did one of these, because he was told, you know, that he had this loss. Oh, well, you know, they're safe with God right now. All of a sudden, the passages that you and I hear in our sermons and so forth, which sound so meaningful, sometimes sound trite when you're in the crisis. I've got a book that was written by a woman theology professor where she wrote, God works all things out for good, and other things I wish people hadn't told me, you know, or something like that. And she firmly believes that, but she says, we don't always dispense it correctly. You know, remember this, we have the entire forces of the world striving you to think like the world. And you've got to start with people where they're at. And that's why there's actually 10 slides after this, if we have time. I want to talk about where you take people where they're at to bring them to where you want them to be. But most of us are too impatient with that. You may know Jesus died for your sins. You may know that the gunshot wound that has disfigured you for life, that there's more to life than the physical appearance. And you may know all those truths, but they're not there yet. And that's the thing you have to remember. You have to try to figure out where they are at and then start there. And the way I do this when I talk about this 10 levels thing I do is that some people are at a Sunday school level understanding of Jesus. So you can sit there and you could have, you know, little Susie coming home singing, Jesus loves me, this I know, but take her favorite toy away and see how well that plays out. You know, it changes. It just changes the way people react. And so she's not going to understand removing the toy away the way you do with years of instruction in the Word of God. And you have to allow for that. But the problem is, and I know what people will say. They'll say, I only have a short amount of time with them. I don't have that much time. I've wrestled with this a lot in life, you know, where this is a one-shot thing. You probably will never have. I had lunch yesterday with Steve Poggles, I guess he's coming back next year during this slot. So he told me to tell you he's going to clean up for anything I did. So I should give you questions to ask him. But he and I were, just talking about all the things that are going on with life, and the idea is that I told him, I said, these are one-shot deals. These are, so we have a Q&A. I give you in 4 or 5 minutes an answer for a question you've been wrestling with for sleepless hours at night. I mean, you never get the time you want. But just if I could give you the best advice I can is start not where you are at, but start where they are at. And if they are mad at God, if they are lost, if they are depressed, then that's where they're at. And the dumbest thing I've heard people say, you ought to read books on the things people say with a grieving family. My favorite still is, he's laid out in the box, well, he sure looks good. This is the worst you're ever going to look in your life. You think about it for a moment. You're dead. This is as bad as it gets. You can't get any worse than that. But people don't know what to say. Well, why not say it? And plus, the other thing that they'll say is they'll go, if you need anything, let me know. Okay, well, yeah, I just lost my spouse, and we've got people coming in from South Carolina and from Montana, and we have no place. Can they stay at your house? No one's going to say that. We got all these people coming over, and the stove doesn't work. Would you fix supper? No one's going to say that. You got to be forth. Just say it. And when this waitress, I just said, if you need me to go with you, I'll go with you. If you want me to come over, I'll come over. In other words, you lay out exactly what you're willing to do. And so that's what, it's a hard question. I mean, it's a good question, but it's a hard question because I would love to do more. Some genetic disorders, such as hemophilia, can now be cured by altering the genes of the hemophiliac. This comes with its own ethical questions. It certainly does, yeah. But going a step further, it will probably be possible in the future to alter someone's genes in a way that the altered genes are passed on to their children instead of their disordered genes. What would be some ethical considerations? Probably the best discussion I've ever gotten in on this had to do with, did you ever read in the paper about 3-parent embryos? The 3-parent embryos where they mitochondrial, a woman's mitochondrial, if it's defective, it can pass on a mitochondrial condition, which is usually fatal to the child. The child will die. I've never heard of a child living past 14. We just had a grandchild of a member of the church die of mitochondrial condition, and I think he was like around 11. And but they now feel they can do that by taking healthy mitochondrial from another woman and inserting that into the egg of the woman who's got the problem mitochondrial, and you'll have a child, and the child will look like you because it doesn't affect the DNA, but it affects the defective mitochondrial. So it was a great story, and I came out kind of riling up the friends of mine that because I think it's a good thing. I don't like doing it with IVF, but I like doing it prior to fertilization. But then they came out with a discovery within the last 6 months or so that they now think that there is some inherited mitochondrial. And inherited is actually the problem with a lot of this work. Like for example, this is a rhetorical. By the way, I'm never asking a question. Never raise your hand during this. But I'm asking a rhetorical question. Have you ever had a blood transfusion? If you had a blood transfusion, welcome to the world of third-person DNA. You've got somebody else's DNA. So people get all worked up over the fact that, it's wrong, we shouldn't be mixing DNA. But, we do it all the time. If you've had any skin grafts, stuff like that, if they didn't come from you, and if they're not worried about, rejection, it came from somebody else. And so somebody asked me once, like if you've had organ transplant, if you've got somebody else's kidney, somebody else's liver or something like that, or heart, you've got somebody else's DNA. Now, you want me to muddy these waters for you? My board is getting a report, because I just reviewed it this morning. My board is getting a report on, do a search, those of you who like to search weird stories, Lydia Fairchild, Lydia Fairchild, just the way it sounds, Fair. And the story of Lydia Fairchild is the story of a woman who I don't know if it was a live-in relationship or something, but she got into paternal support, a support cushion that was getting challenged. And what they found out is that the man indeed was the father of both children, but that she was not the mother. DNA tests showed that she was not the mother. And of course, her response was, I was there. It came out of me. I am the mother, and then the medical people, everyone did it. Well, they discovered that she actually, in the womb, was twinned. And the twin died, and the twin got absorbed into her developing embryo. And so when they went to check DNA, they were picking up the DNA of the twin, but not her. Now, you can check it out. When you search it, it's a weird story, but it raises all sorts of questions that I'm going to challenge and create nightmares for my board for. But, remember this, that whenever you get caught into a pickle with bioethical things, remember what's unique about Christian bioethics? It's the only field of ethics or bioethics in which motive is the first determinant of what is right or wrong. What is your motive to correct it? Your motive is to help. Your motive is to cure. Somebody asked me once about, with introducing foreign DNA and all that kind of stuff, which, by the way, any of you got pig valves for, again, rhetorical question, any of you got pig valves for heart valves? Pig valves are becoming more and more common because they don't reject as harshly or as often as other valves. You've got other DNA in you, to some degree. So now, at some point, I'm going to look at Diane and she's going to go, you're starting to get too technical. But I remain, and those of you who don't like this, you can write me hate mail. I don't have time to answer a lot of it, especially if you're nasty, then I definitely don't have time. I'm a big fan of mRNA research, messenger RNA and the way that it transports information. It's a fascinating field of study, and they just came out within the last month where they feel that with mRNA research, that they may have a treatment that could be up to 70% successful in some clinical trials dealing with multiple myeloma, which the reason that hangs in my head is because that's what took my best friend. Of course, it always comes too late, you know how that goes. But the, and I've always said back when Moderna was coming out with the mRNA vaccine for COVID, I always said that based on everything I've seen, if there's ever a potential for correcting the common cold, this is it. And it has to do with the way mRNA works that's different from DNA. It's what's called kind of more of a transporting mechanism for protein. The point is that there are gene treatments, there are some treatments that are not supposed to be passed down. And I think that's the direction they're going. Where we get into really dangerous territory is this thing called CRISPR. CRISPR is the technology where they can splice out your bad DNA and replace it with good DNA. And of course, it'll correct an issue. But what I've told people is like, if you are really concerned about what this means down the line, don't have children after you have third-person DNA. And I don't think that that's bad advice. If I'm 66 years old, chances are pretty good I'm not fathering any other children, that kind of thing. So now treatment will help me be better. Okay, but if I were fathering children, and we're finding that, because I get those letters from people too where they'll say, well, we don't know, but you know how that goes. In time they will know, that it gets passed on. But if you're worried about it, then don't have children. I know that sounds simplistic, but I do think it's a legitimate concern. This is out of my realm, truly. So I don't. Somebody had asked. I'm just going to say, if it's one of you, somebody asked about intellectual property. I don't get into intellectual property stuff. I do a little bit as a hobby, but not with this work. Oh, I love this question. My concern about eternity is that it may be boring. So whoever wrote that, you're thinking just like me. It's like standing before the throne of God day and night in his temple, and I'm going, really? I have trouble standing that long. The problem is that all of our definitions of eternity are confined by our experiences of the temporal. And so let me give you a little different flavor. Is the organist here? Is the organist? Okay, well, whoever the organist is, you have brilliant organists here. Every time I've been here for worship service, we haven't always had that luxury around us, but it was brilliant organists, and sometimes you play a hymn, Jerusalem the Golden, or whatever it is, and it's just moving and everything. Have you ever had that on occasion? Even if you don't like church music, every once in a while, there's that hymn that just makes you feel good, that just is very moving and so forth. Okay, view that as like the very, very tiniest tip of an iceberg of what every moment is like in heaven. Because we have all of these warring forces in this world that want to bore you, that want to distract you, that want to get you to be cynical. I said to Diane yesterday when we were doing something, I just said, I wonder what Leroy's doing now, my friend who died. I wonder. Now, first of all, you got to remember that in heaven, time is not really an issue. So even thinking through all that's going to be a challenge. What is the well standing about using the birth control pill? Is it considered a type of abortion because it prevents a fertilized egg from implanting into the uterus? You kind of answered the first question with the second question. The better way to understand birth control is there's either preventative birth control or barrier birth control or hormonal birth control. Hormonal birth control always carries with it, and this is in the FDA documents and everything, always carries with it the idea that it has what's called a third operative mechanism, which is that if the embryo is fertilized, that it has so changed the uterine lining that it fails to implant. So if it does indeed work that way, that's an abortifacient. We wouldn't like it. Now, the question is, how often does it work that way? Nobody knows. Does it work that way 1 out of every 3 times? We don't know. Does it work that way 1 out of every 1,000 times? We don't know. And so when I do pre-marriage counseling, I will tell people that if you have a God-pleasing motive for using birth control, and there are God-pleasing motives, if you have one, then I would strongly recommend barrier or natural family planning. Now, that being said too, there is all sorts of research going on now about male birth control, hormonal or chemical male birth control, that basically what it does is it kind of makes the sperm sluggish so that it doesn't ever get past the cervical lining. And so that's going to, they're still in the experimental stages, but that's going to change the dynamic of things too. The only thing that I do find interesting is somebody once said at a conference that if it alternated between men and women for having children, no family would ever have more than 3 children, because it would start with the woman, then the man would go through the pregnancy, then the woman, and the man said, I'm not doing this again. And oftentimes, if let's just say we found an ethical way for male birth control beyond barrier, something that's injectable or something, then your next struggle will be to get men to do it, and so that's going to be a problem. But I personally, knowing what I know about chemical reactions and so forth, I mean, it takes a lot to talk me into taking aspirin. I mean, I don't, hormones, when you read the history of the early pills and so forth, they've caused problems over the years. And, but not always. People will say, I've used it, never had a problem, that kind of stuff. Okay, this is the long one. Can I address, I'm just taking the last paragraph. Can I address social factors that can either help or hinder individuals in choosing life, Medicare costs, medical disability and obtaining, difficulty in obtaining. Okay, what can we do? That's kind of, without reading the whole thing, that's what I'm going to say. Pro-choice people or pro-abortion people will criticize pro-life people by saying, once you talk a woman out of having another child, you don't do anything to care for her. Personally, I think that, remember, all arguments and heated debate are always extremes. They always are. So they're overstating their case when the pro-life people say, that's not true, we're willing to take care, we're willing to love them. That's not true either. Both sides tend to overstate what they plan to do, what they want to do, and so forth. You got to remember that. Do I think there's more to do? This is going to be a shocker to you. It was much easier for me to run a home for single mothers in a liberal state than in a conservative state. When I was running New Beginnings in Denver or Arapahoe County, it went much better than it goes in Milwaukee County. Now, Milwaukee County is liberal, kind of liberal county, but it's generally a conservative state. And so the problem you have is that in the approach that you get to helping programs is, remember, I think I used this illustration before. Liberals think that you don't know, you won't help people, so we're going to take your money and we're going to help people on your behalf. That's kind of a very simplified liberal approach. Conservatives say, let people have their own money, they're going to generate the economy, and they will step forward and take care of people. But the reality is, if you're a conservative person, you got your PPP money or whatever it was, a little bit of an extra, you were still getting paid from work, you got this money, stuff like that. What's the first thing you did? You went and bought a big TV, or you bought a bigger car, a newer car, or something like that. We're not any better at it on our end than they are on their end. So what do? Where's the compromise? I meet maybe every 6 weeks or so with a representative of the state assembly, a Republican. We become friends, and we meet, and he's a great guy. He's very conscientious, and he has to put up with me saying, I think you Republicans are all stupid. I think you Democrats are all stupid. I get very candid with him, and we talk about it. But he genuinely has a heart for people. I'm very impressed with him, and he seems to have a good sense about how to navigate the waters. You are right that if we have a single mother and we give her money to help her, to incentivize her not to abort her children, you are right. There will be other single women who will intentionally get pregnant so they can get the money. You are right. That will happen. You are right that, will they sit on their dead butts and not get out and work? You are right. There will be some who will do that. You see, one of the things is that because politics has a tendency to be very linear, we only speak of black, white, right, wrong, good, bad. We fail to recognize that in order to make your case, we were talking about this coming down, that we tend to state everything in the extreme. And so everybody, remember I said you're always known by your lowest denominator? So that's how you do it in politics. In order to make the case, we got to state in the extreme. When Dietrich Bonhoeffer, I was reading Eric Metaxas's book on Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and at the same time I was reading, I can't think of the guy's name, but it's a thick book on Winston Churchill. And I'm reading in Winston Churchill's book that there's this group of people from Germany who kept trying to meet with him to tell him that there are people in Germany who don't believe in what the Nazis are doing. And Churchill won't meet with them. And then I'm reading in Metaxas's book that Bonhoeffer's trying to get this group of people to meet with Churchill to tell him there are these people who aren't willing to do this. And you know what Churchill's reasoning was for not meeting with them? You know, because he saw Germany as a great threat, and he said, I can't give any indication that there are good people in Germany because it will ruin the resolve of the British people to fight the Germans trying to come across the water. And that's how people think. And so that's why I do think the church has to step forward and do it. Hopefully we're oriented differently from the world. Okay, so I'm just going to leave it there. We got 4 minutes. You're going to get this, and it's already written for you on the worksheet, but I want to explain this to you. I call it 10 levels of sanctification. Now that I saw that Pastor Lyra went upstairs, now I can do this. Understanding where people are and how to communicate with them. Step 1 is that you are a new believer. Now, sanctification is your ability to live consistently with your convictions. Okay, so when you have a new believer, you're brought into God's family through baptism. When you have a child, when I baptize a child, I have no great expectations of sanctification from them. I mean, it isn't like all of a sudden they're going to talk in tongues or anything like that. They just baptized, and that's it. Number 2 is what we call dutiful compliance. It looks like this. The baby is sitting in the high chair. You bring him up to the table. We're going to say the table prayer. Somebody reaches over, grabs the baby's hands, holds them together while we all say the prayer. Dutiful compliance. You will pray because we're all praying. This is how we're going to train you good habits. Number 3 is Sunday school, and the child begins to understand. So you send the child to Sunday school. They begin to learn things, the way you live, the way you act. Remember, we're talking sanctification. They're beginning to learn the way you live and the way you act. And then number 4 is you get to the point with what I call mindful compliance. Now, this is contrasted with dutiful compliance, because remember, in dutiful compliance, you force them to pray. Mindful compliance means when the girls were in school and they were learning to read, and Pizza Hut gave away those certificates, so you get the free thing at Pizza Hut. So we'd go to Pizza Hut. By the time they made the pizza, and I don't know why it takes an hour to make a pizza, but you're dying of hunger, and of course you couldn't afford to buy the breadsticks, the appetizers and stuff. So what happens is that when the food comes, you just chow right in. I mean, it's there. They even serve like the first piece up for you or whatever they did. We'd start right in, and then all of a sudden one of the girls would go, "Aren't we going to pray?" That's mindful compliance. They've begun to develop a consciousness of how I should act and what I should do. Then you get confirmation. Confirmation, in my view, is one of the most controversial things we do in our church body, because we think that they're at the point now where they're trained to apply what they've learned in life and so forth. I don't know. I'm sure St. John's is a better congregation than any that I've been part of, but confirmation class, sometimes, they were like me. The moment I was confirmed, I wanted to quit the church. I mean, I was sick of religion, by then. Okay, but that's what it is. You're trained to apply. And then you get to the point of what we call righteous indignation. So you're going to Wisconsin Lutheran High School, you're going to prep, and you actually begin to know enough of God's word to say, that is wrong, that God would never allow that for abortion. And then church becomes such a regular part of your life that when we have an ice storm or something and you miss church, it feels awkward. It doesn't feel right. Then the pastors recognize that you're good. They ask you to take a role in spiritual leadership. You get to the point where Christ is a focal point of your life. Like my mom and dad are at that. I go over there, they're reading the Bibles. Everything they talk about is kind of context around God. And then you're perfect, that means you're dead, because you're in heaven, But the point is that the exercise program that all of us have is we run up and down this steps. But the reality is a lot of times, like this is probably where we are right here, between steps 5 and 7, or maybe even 8, but we spend a little time running up and down, but pretty much in that area. Sometimes, and you get this frustration when you have a highly spiritual person do something profoundly stupid, and you're going, why did they do that? Because this is the way you're thinking. All I'm saying with this model, and this will be the last thing I say today, and that is, when you take people where they're at, try to figure out where they are in this steps. And then before you come down in all righteous indignation to try to correct them, simply ask yourself, how long did it take for me to get from that level to this level? And that sometimes you have to be willing to allow time. Time is incredible assistance. Now people will say, what if I don't have the time? Well then, how about Christ-like love? Which means, what sacrifice can I make right now to demonstrate to them my commitment to them? And so I'll close with this story. When I created this model when I was speaking at California Lutheran High School. A junior in high school had asked me what to do with her best friend wants to get an abortion. And so I came back, I created the model, and I did it, and I said, tell me about your best friend. She lives across the street from me. She went to Sunday school with me. When it came time to start confirmation class, she didn't want to go. Her mother said, oh dear, you don't have to go. She said, but we kept being friends. We'd go shopping together and everything. So now she is up here, righteous indignation. Her best friend is down here. And I said, how long did it take, how many years is that? That's like 4 years, 5 years. And I said, what are you going to be doing with her? She's going for the abortion on Tuesday. We're going shopping on Saturday. And she said, we'll spend 2 hours together. So she's going to try to accomplish 4 years of work in 2 hours. She said, how do I do it? I said, you called her your best friend, right? Okay. So you tell her, I will go with you to tell your parents. I will go with you to the prenatal appointments. I will go with you to the delivery. I will go with you if you decide to place the child for adoption. If you decide to keep the child and raise the child, I will be there to help you. I said, if you decide to go for the abortion, I will not go with you to the abortion, but I will be here when you come back. So I'm now going to tell you, I have just offered you a substantial portion of my life. I'm going to ask you now that you not have the abortion, and I'm willing to be there for you. Okay, now that's sacrifice, and that's a lot harder to do, but that's something to think about. Okay, you just got 72 hours in 4 hours, so, and there's no way, and I did injustice. Those of you who haven't signed up, there is a sign-up sheet on the end of the table. Do that on your way out. You get on the list, you'll get emails, you'll get fundraising letters, everything. Live with it. Really? Okay. Just live with it. And if you got questions too, just shoot emails to us. Thank you, everyone.